Morning, it's just Ash and Jen and Molly from the Whitechapel. Are you okay?
The outreach team have a huge amount of emotional resilience doing this type of work, but at the moment it's really wearing thin.
A woman in Minneapolis slept through a night that killed 2 people. The temperature hit -18. She had no heater, no electricity, no insulation you'd recognize from any store. Just a secondhand tent, a collection of things other people threw away, and a system she spent 3 winters perfecting. Her name is Grace. She is 47 years old. She used to manage a dental office. Now she manages something harder, staying alive between sundown and sunrise in a nylon shell that is thinner than your winter jacket. But here's what disturbs most people when they hear about women like Grace. She is not just surviving these nights, she is sleeping through them, deeply, comfortably enough that she wakes up functional, walks to her part-time job at a warehouse, and clocks in before anyone suspects she spent the night in a tent behind a church parking lot. The techniques she uses are not random, they are engineered, and some of them contradict everything you have been told about staying warm. Let's start with the ground, because that's where most people lose the battle before it even begins. Grace does not sleep on the ground. Not really. She sleeps on a system she calls the sandwich, and it took her 2 brutal winters to figure it out. The bottom layer is a sheet of Tyvek house wrap she pulled from a construction dumpster. That papery white material builders staple to houses before the siding goes on. It is waterproof, nearly indestructible, and contractors throw away scraps constantly. On top of that goes a layer of flattened cardboard, not thin cereal box stuff, but thick double-walled corrugated from appliance boxes. Refrigerator boxes are the gold standard. Those wavy ridges inside trap air, and trapped air is basically nature's insulation. The same principle as a down jacket, just less glamorous. Then another Tyvek layer. Then 2 inches of closed-cell foam she cut from a discarded gym mat. Then a final layer of wool blankets on top. 5 layers between her body and the frozen ground. Here is why this matters so much. Cold earth steals body heat through direct contact roughly 25 times faster than cold air does. Most people who freeze in tents die from below, not above. The air inside might be tolerable, but the ground underneath is a heat vampire that never stops feeding. Grace figured this out after her first winter when she woke up one morning unable to feel her hip. The side she had been sleeping on had been pressed against concrete all night through a single layer of sleeping bag. She could not walk properly for 3 days. That was the last time she ever slept without her sandwich system. And here's something that surprised even experienced campers when they heard about it. Grace adds a final secret layer that costs absolutely free. She stuffs crumpled newspaper between the cardboard and the foam. Not flat sheets, crumpled balls. Each ball creates a pocket of dead air. Dozens of those pockets together form a continuous insulating barrier that mimics the way double-pane windows work. A full Sunday newspaper, the thick one with all the ads nobody reads, provides enough material to cover her entire sleeping area. Depression-era hobos called this technique California blankets, which is pretty dark humor when you think about it. But the science hasn't changed in 90 years. Paper traps air, air insulates, and free is the best price for anything when you're choosing between insulation and dinner. But even the best floor system only solves half the problem. Because heat doesn't just escape downward. It rises straight up through that thin nylon ceiling and disappears into the night sky. That is where Grace's tent ceiling hack changes the math completely. Grace does not let heat leave through the top of her tent. She built a false ceiling using 2 emergency Mylar blankets. Those crinkly silver sheets marathon runners wrap themselves in at finish lines, duct taped together and suspended about 8 inches below the actual tent roof. Total cost, $3. Those flimsy-looking sheets reflect up to 90% of radiant body heat straight back down. Without them, your warmth rises, hits the nylon, and radiates into the freezing sky. With them, that heat bounces back toward your body like a mirror made of warmth. Here's the trick Grace figured out that most people miss entirely. She does not attach the Mylar directly to the tent fabric. She leaves that 8-inch air gap on purpose. That gap creates a buffer zone of dead air that acts as additional insulation. It is the same principle behind thermos bottles and double-pane windows. The air gap does as much work as the reflective surface itself. 2 layers of protection from one cheap material and a roll of tape. Now Mylar crinkles, loudly. Every time wind hits the tent or Grace shifts in her sleep, it sounds like someone aggressively opening a bag of chips at midnight. For a woman sleeping alone in a tent, noise is a serious problem. It draws attention from people you do not want knowing you are there. Grace solved this by laying a thin fleece blanket over the Mylar before taping it up. Silent warmth. The fleece absorbs the sound while the Mylar underneath keeps reflecting heat. She told me it took her 2 sleepless nights of crinkling before she figured that out. She said she almost ripped the whole system down out of frustration before a woman in a neighboring tent suggested the fleece trick. Survival knowledge gets shared one miserable night at a time. There is one more element to Grace's ceiling system that nobody expects. She hangs a dark-colored towel from the center of the false ceiling during daylight hours. Even in winter, sunlight penetrates nylon. That dark fabric absorbs solar heat all afternoon, then slowly releases it as the temperature drops after sunset. Passive solar heating using a towel. Her tent is measurably warmer at sundown than identical tents without it. It is not a massive difference, maybe 5 or 6 degrees, but when you are starting from -10, every degree is a negotiation with survival. But all this ceiling engineering means nothing if the cold air keeps sneaking in through gaps you can't even see. For tent dwellers, air leaks are a silent killer that most people dramatically underestimate. Wind chill is a brutal multiplier. At 30 degrees with a 15-mile-per-hour breeze, your body loses heat as though it is actually 15 degrees outside. That's a 15-degree penalty just from moving air. Grace's tent has a zipper. Zippers leak. Every tooth in that zipper is a tiny gap where cold air slips through all night long. Her fix is almost embarrassingly simple. She runs a strip of duct tape along the inside of the closed zipper every single night and peels it off every morning. One roll of tape lasts her about 3 weeks, 60 cents a week to eliminate her biggest heat leak. But zippers are not the worst offenders. The tent floor where it meets the walls creates a channel for cold air to pool. Cold air is heavy. It sinks and it collects at the lowest points inside your shelter, sitting there and surrounding your sleeping area with an invisible moat of freezing air. Grace fights this with draft stuffers, rolled up clothing, plastic bags stuffed with newspaper, old towels, anything she can wedge into the seam where the floor meets the wall. She circles her entire tent perimeter with these stuffers every night. It takes about 5 minutes. It saves her roughly 8 to 10 degrees of heat loss, according to a building science principle called infiltration reduction. The same concept costs homeowners thousands in professional weather stripping. Grace does it with garbage bags and old socks. She also learned to position her tent entrance away from the prevailing wind. It took her 3 relocations to figure out which direction the wind typically comes from at her spot. Now she parks her tent with the door on the leeward side and builds an L-shaped windbreak using a plastic tarp stretched between 2 shopping carts weighted down with rocks. Wind hits the barrier, deflects around, and never touches the tent entrance directly. Highway engineers use the exact same principle with snow fences. Grace uses shopping carts and a $5 tarp. But here's the thing about sealing a tent this tight. You've created a moisture trap, and moisture inside a freezing tent is more dangerous than most people realize. That's where things get uncomfortable, and for women sleeping alone, genuinely risky. Every night, a sleeping person exhales roughly 1 pint of water vapor. 1 pint. In a sealed tent, that moisture condenses on every cold surface. By morning, the tent walls are dripping. The sleeping bag feels damp, and wet insulation loses up to 40% of its warming capacity. That expensive sleeping bag Grace saved months to buy now performs like a discount throw blanket from a gas station. But moisture creates a worse problem that hits women in tents harder than men: mold. A damp, sealed tent grows mold within 3 to 4 days. Mold spores in an enclosed sleeping space trigger respiratory infections, and homeless women develop pneumonia at nearly twice the rate of homeless men. The reason is structural. Women seal their tents tighter for security. Every gap you close against an intruder is also a gap you have closed against ventilation. Safety and breathability are in direct conflict, and women are forced to choose between them every single night. Grace's solution is precise. She leaves a vent open at the top of her tent, roughly 2 inches, not at the bottom where cold air enters. At the top where warm, moisture-laden air naturally rises and exits. This creates a slow convection current. Warm, wet air escapes high and gets replaced by dry, cold air entering low through micro gaps she cannot fully seal anyway. She loses maybe 2 or 3 degrees of warmth, but her sleeping bag stays dry, her tent walls do not drip, and she does not end up in an emergency room in February. She also stuffs silica gel packets inside her sleeping bag and between her blanket layers. Those little do-not-eat pouches come from shoeboxes and electronics packaging. She collects them from every store that will let her rummage through their recycling. Other women save them for her. A handful of silica packets has become a form of currency in her camp, worth more than spare change when your survival depends on staying dry. Now, even with all this engineering, the coldest hours hit between 3 and 4 in the morning. Your core temperature drops to its lowest point. Metabolism slows. And if you are sleeping in a tent without heating, this is when hypothermia stops being a word on a page and starts being a real possibility. That is when Grace's body heat strategy becomes absolutely critical. 45 minutes before she seals up for the night, Grace eats fat. Peanut butter from the jar, a handful of walnuts, sometimes canned fish if the food pantry had it. Digesting fat produces significantly more body heat than carbohydrates or protein. Your digestive system works harder to break down fatty foods, and that extra metabolic effort generates internal warmth that peaks 3 to 4 hours after eating. Grace eats at 8:30. Peak heat production hits right around midnight to 1 a.m. Then she has a small emergency stash, usually a few almonds wrapped in a napkin inside her sleeping bag for the 3 a.m. danger window. She does not even fully wake up. Muscle memory finds the almonds, she chews half asleep, and her metabolism relights for another 3 hours. Arctic Special Forces units use the same technique before cold weather operations. Grace learned it from a YouTube video she watched at the public library on a Tuesday afternoon while her phone was charging. And here is one thing she never touches: alcohol. Someone offered her bourbon during a brutal cold snap last January, swearing it would warm her up. She declined. Smart move. Alcohol dilates blood vessels, pushing warm blood to the skin surface where it radiates away into freezing air. You feel warm for about 20 minutes. Then your body dumps heat faster than it can produce it. 3 homeless people in Minneapolis died last winter after drinking to stay warm. The warmth was an illusion. The hypothermia that followed was not. But metabolism only carries you so far, and a single body in a tent generates roughly 80 watts of heat. That's not enough when it's 20 below outside. There's one more trick Grace uses before the community section of her survival system kicks in: hot water bottles. Not the fancy rubber kind from a pharmacy. Nalgene bottles filled with hot water from gas station bathrooms or church kitchens. She fills 2 every evening during the window when most fast food restaurants don't question someone using their hot water tap. 1 goes between her thighs, 1 goes against her stomach. She places them against major blood vessels on purpose. Warm blood circulates from those contact points throughout her entire body, turning her circulatory system into a heat distribution network. A 2-liter bottle filled with 150-degree water holds enough thermal energy to keep a sleeping bag noticeably warm for 5 to 6 hours. By morning, the water is cool but drinkable. Dual purpose. Grace loves anything that does 2 jobs. Her grandmother used hot water bottles in rural Georgia in the 1950s. Same trick, different century, different desperation. But even hot water and metabolism reach their limits, And that's when the most important survival decision a homeless woman makes isn't about technique at all. It's about trust. Grace doesn't sleep alone anymore. Her tent partner is a woman named Yolanda, 51, a former school bus driver who lost her housing after her landlord sold the building. 2 bodies in a sealed tent produce 160 watts of combined heat. That doubles the thermal output. In Grace's small tent, the interior temperature jumps 10 to 15 degrees just from having a second person. No fuel burned, no equipment needed, just biology and proximity. But sharing a tent means something different for women on the streets than it does for men. Trust is not given, it is tested. Grace spent 2 months getting to know Yolanda before they merged shelters. They ate meals together. They watched each other's belongings. They had 3 separate conversations about boundaries before Yolanda moved in. There are rules. Yolanda sleeps closest to the exit. Grace manages the ventilation. They alternate who wakes up at 3 a.m. to check conditions and readjust the draft stuffers that shift overnight. Their camp has built something larger, a 7 a.m. check-in system. Every woman appears at a central point near the parking lot entrance. If someone does not show, 2 people go looking within 15 minutes. Not an hour, 15 minutes. Because at minus 15 degrees, the difference between a fast welfare check and a slow one can be the difference between frostbite and a funeral. Last February, that system saved a woman named Patrice, who had gone into early hypothermia. She was conscious but confused, could not zip her sleeping bag, and would not have called for help on her own. 2 women found her at 7:12 a.m. She was in a warming center by 7:30 a.m. And here's the part that cracks through all the engineering and technique and thermal math. These women don't just keep each other warm, they keep each other human. Yolanda braids Grace's hair on Sunday mornings. Grace taught Yolanda how to build the sandwich floor system. When Yolanda's son called her for the first time in 18 months, Grace sat outside the tent for 40 minutes in 12-degree weather to give her privacy. Then she came back inside, sealed the zipper with tape, stuffed the draft blockers into place, and they both went to sleep. 2 women in a nylon tent with newspaper insulation, a $3 Mylar ceiling, and a duct tape weather stripping system that a building scientist would call surprisingly sound. Every technique Grace uses is simple. The layered floor, the reflective ceiling, the wind barriers, the sealed gaps, the metabolic timing, the shared body heat. None of it is complicated. None of it costs more than a few dollars. The science has been understood for decades or even centuries. Thermos bottles, double-pane windows, Arctic expedition protocols, medieval bed warmers, they all follow the same principles. The difference is that Grace applies them every single night because the consequence of forgetting is not a cold walk to the thermostat, it is death. 9 people froze to death in Minneapolis last winter. Grace knew 2 of them. Both were sleeping alone. Both had tents and sleeping bags and blankets. What they did not have was someone checking on them at 7 in the morning. Grace told me the hardest part is not the cold. The cold, she said, I figured out. The hardest part is people assuming I did not, that I am just lying there shivering and waiting for someone to rescue me. I'm not waiting, I am engineering. Every single night. If you found this story important, please subscribe. There are more stories like this that need to be told.